Hello and welcome to Kantipur Rise and Shine. My name is Pratibha Thuladar. The Amnesty International has launched its My Body, My Rights campaign, coinciding with the International Women's Day, which is tomorrow. To tell us more about the campaign, joining me here in the studio is the Secretary General of Amnesty International, Mr. Salil Shetty. Salil Shetty joined Amnesty International as the organization's 8th Secretary General in July 2010. He's a long-term activist on poverty and justice. He leads the movement's worldwide work to end human rights violations. Prior to joining Amnesty International, Salil Shetty was director of the United Nations Millennium Campaign from 2003 to 2010. From 1998 to 2003, he was chief executive of ActionAid. He studied at the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad and at the London School of Economics. Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
You just launched the My Body, My Rights campaign. Let's begin by talking about what this campaign means.
Well, it's essentially addressing one of the most basic set of human rights, which are internationally recognized human rights, which are sexual and reproductive health rights. And in concrete terms, it means that every individual should be able to make decisions about their own body and their own health. So it means, for example, that a woman should be able to decide if and when to get married, whether she would like to have children, how many children, and when she wants to have the children. It also means that people should be able to lead a life which is free of violence. So it's a very tangible set of demands. And the other key issue we are focusing on is many governments across the world have laws which are very discriminatory and actually deny people access to sexual reproductive health. So, for example, there are many governments which deny contraception access, for example, or safe abortion. So it's very tangible things which make a very big difference. And because, and of course, a key dimension to all of this is that everybody should have a right to access both information on sexual and reproductive health, but also services. So it's very concrete things like that. As you know, the fact is that many countries deny these things and the consequences are very high. The costs are very high, particularly to women. Just to give you some statistics around this globally, and My Body, My Rights is a global campaign, and we're going to run it for 2 years. And if you take the whole issue of contraception, for example, 215 million women across the world are denied contraception. So the scale of the problem is quite staggering. Because of unsafe abortions, almost 50,000 women die every year. And 3,000 young people are infected every year with HIV, AIDS, and all of these are very interrelated questions. And then the dimension of violence. Most surveys would show, shockingly, even in the European Union, that between a third and half the women face sexual violence in their life. So, all of this put together, and the other issue which is becoming a bigger issue increasingly is same-sex activity, for example, in 75 countries, more than 75 countries, is criminalized. In several countries, it's actually punishable by death. And the reason why Amnesty has launched this campaign at this point is that because of the rolling back of some of these basic rights in several countries across the world. And this year is very important. There's the International Conference for Population Development, which happened 20 years ago. And there was this Cairo Plan of Action. That's going to be reviewed this year. So we think that giving a big push for this issue is really crucial from the point of view. Of course, women's rights is a big focus, but it's not just women. It cuts across. Young people are the ones who are most affected by these issues.
You chose to launch the campaign in Nuwakot. What is the significance of launching it in a village instead of how these campaigns are usually launched at major conferences?
Absolutely. No, I've just come back. I spent the whole day yesterday in Nuwakot in a small village called Samandartar in the valley, and it's called Samandartar, I was told, because it's got two villages, which are two rivers which surround the village. And this is a kind of a small piece of land between two villages. And I was so happy that we launched it there because, as you said, most of these global things happen in Paris or London or New York. So I was first really pleased that we did it in Nepal, but also even more pleased that we could actually launch it with women who are facing many of these challenges. So this global campaign is going to be running for 2 years now. and we're covering 5 countries which span all regions. So I mentioned earlier that we shouldn't assume that this problem is only a problem of developing countries. So one of the cases we're looking at is Ireland, where many women are denied lawful abortion, safe abortion options. We have Burkina Faso in West Africa, which is another country we are focused on, the Maghreb region, which is in North Africa. So it's kind of a spread across, and we have Latin America, El Salvador as well. And each of these places, the issues are slightly different: contraception, abortion, violence, rape. So, but the common underlying thread, and I'll come to that, which is why we've chosen Nepal, is because if you look at the whole issue of sexual reproductive rights, you'll often get to the point where, yes, there are health issues, yes, there are practical issues, but the fundamental structural cause behind this is discrimination against women. And Nepal, unfortunately, emblematic of South Asia in many ways, has a deep discrimination problem against women. I don't need to tell you this. So yeah, so I was very happy we did it yesterday. It was also very nice because in Nepali, when you say, you can correct me if I've got it wrong, but my body, my rights, translates into, how do you say it? Maro Sharir? Mero Sharir, Mero Adhikar. Mero Sharir, Mero Adhikar. So, but when we launched it yesterday, and I was talking to the women about their issues, how they see this, they said, no, you shouldn't call it Mero Sharir, Mero Adhikar. You should say Amro Sharir, Amro Adhikar, because it's our bodies, collectively. So, and it was very powerful. The experiences that they're going through, both within their own families, which prevent them from accessing many of these services and rights, but also the response from the state and the society. So it's multidimensional.
And I think also because what any woman faces, because she's a part of a society, becomes Hamro or ours, because it's part of a bigger problem.
Exactly. Absolutely.
I was going to, you mentioned how in some countries abortion is not legal, and that's because of religious reasons as well. So I'm just wondering, how does Amnesty International hope to step into that? Because the moment something is related to religious causes or to religion, it becomes very difficult because it's a very sensitive aspect of society.
In many countries, Amnesty International fights for people to be able to exercise their freedom to religion. So, Amnesty International is independent, secular. We don't have any religious biases or any kind of. We don't subscribe to one religion or one political view, or we're completely impartial in that sense. But we fight for people to have freedom of religion. So it's not a question about pitting freedom of religion versus freedom to sexual reproductive rights. But it is the case that while people, of course, should have the freedom to pursue their religion, that cannot be at the cost of infringing on basic rights like sexual and reproductive rights. And it cannot be a basis to discriminate against women, for example. And it's not, I don't believe that the women who are, for example, the women I met yesterday, they're all deeply religious women. It's not like, they don't have the same beliefs as the men have or the society have. So it's not as if, they practice a different religion. They practice the same religion. So you cannot discriminate because, you say that this is against religion. That would put us in a very difficult situation.
You mentioned earlier how in 75 countries in the world, same-sex relationships are
criminalized.
Criminalized.
Yes.
How does Amnesty International hope to approach the states about it?
No, so the value addition or the unique dimension that Amnesty brings to this discussion, because it's not a new issue. Most of these issues we're discussing are issues which have been around for a long time. But what we are doing is to bring a human rights lens to this, which means that when you look at it as a denial of basic rights, then it comes with the responsibility of the state, first of all, to protect people and their rights, but also to promote it and to enforce it. So in the case of you raised a point about the same-sex relationship issue. So Nigeria, for example, has very recently, Nigeria and West Africa has brought in some very sort of regressive legislation around the issue of sort of LGBT relationships or same-sex relationships. So we would in that case, take this up with the government, we would take it to the media, both within Nigeria but also internationally, to put pressure on the government not to have laws which are discriminatory, not to have laws which infringe on people's basic rights.
You're going to meet some of the top leaders in Nepal today to discuss some of these rights issues. What specifically are you going to raise in your discussions?
The main point that I'm hoping to make to the Prime Minister, one of the first pieces of research that we did on the My Body, My Rights campaign is in relation to the problem of uterine prolapse, which is, again, it's a global problem, but Nepal has a particularly unique situation, partly because of the strenuous loads that women have to carry in Nepal, particularly in the mountainous regions, but also because of the deep discrimination which I mentioned earlier. So 600,000 women estimated to be suffering from uterine prolapse in this country. And we have to remember that uterine prolapse is not a disease. It's a condition which is literally man-made. So there's one of these cases which we've documented, which is a woman from western Nepal called Kopila. Now, like so many women in this country, I think almost a third of the women here get married when they're adolescents, far too early. And many of them have children very soon after. And essentially the uterine prolapse, which is what's called a kind of collapsing of the womb, is an extreme assault on a woman's body, which is too many children too early and not having the basic conditions, healthy conditions which a woman needs, including malnutrition, including spacing, birth spacing. So Kopila's example is a very unfortunate but very telling example. So she got married at the age of, I think, 17 or so, first child at the age of 18. She's uneducated, illiterate, from a very poor family. So in the space of 6 years, she has 4 children, back to back. And when she has a baby, she can't afford the luxury of resting and not working for those periods. So she's been given very little rest, and unfortunately also faces a lot of domestic violence. So she's now living with uterine prolapse for 6 years, and something which can be easily, it's something which could have been addressed. So the main call we are making today with the Prime Minister and the government as such is that the Nepal government recognizes that there is a problem. In fact, there is a Supreme Court ruling instructing the government to take action, but the response is weak. So first of all, there's a very strong focus on surgery, which is kind of more the curative things at a very late stage. But what needs to be done is you have to deal with it on a preventive basis. And when you get to the prevention side, it becomes abundantly clear that the problem is a human rights issue. So if you don't deal with the question of the status of women and their rights in a very patriarchal society as we have in South Asia, then you can't deal with this. So the first thing is, it's really important for the government to recognize that this is a human rights problem. Because otherwise you're tackling the wrong problem. If you think of it purely as a health issue, yes, it is a health issue, but the underlying causes are rights violations. So that needs to be addressed. And you need a comprehensive strategy. So you have a Safe Motherhood Initiative, for example, which is good. They've created a draft strategy as well, the Nepal government, but it's not implemented. So it's not yet been activated. So that's the main call we're making to the government.
Okay. We ran this report a couple of days ago from the Dome community in southwestern Nepal. So they have children as young as 5-year-old who are being forced into child marriage. And we cannot even begin to imagine what these children go through. So the report released by Amnesty International on uterine prolapse has received a lot of different kinds of responses. I'm just wondering, what are some of the more significant responses you've received from the authorities here? Because if we really look at how Nepal has fared in terms of maternal mortality or infant mortality, the results have been very positive. But if we look at uterine prolapse, it's a really scary situation.
Which is why, that's precisely why I think we have to understand quite deeply as to why this issue has not been resolved. And I spent almost, half an hour talking to a small group of women yesterday. And I was asking them as to, did you get support from your husband when you talked about this? And I said, which one of you? Any one of you got support? And they said, no, if we had, we wouldn't be talking to you about this. So it's a very sensitive issue. It's inside the domestic context. But, we have a bit of a habit in South Asia to say, this is a family issue, we don't talk about it. Unfortunately, you have to talk about it because you can't address it if you hide it. So, and some of it will take time to change the attitudes, but it is the responsibility of the Nepali government because it has international obligations. They've signed up to treaties like, on discrimination, violence against women, CEDAW, ICPD, so many of these international obligations, apart from domestic obligations. In fact, the draft constitution is very progressive on economic social rights. So, and of course, it's a kind of a moral issue as well. You can't have 600,000 women in this country having to live with this. I mean, I was talking about Kopila. Kopila has been living in this condition for 6 years. And every woman we met was saying that first we have to tackle this human rights issue, and second, the government has to at least give us the basic treatment, because most of the women come from very poor backgrounds. So, I mean, if you're very rich, and that's a different story, you can find a solution. But when the majority of the population is living under difficult circumstances and you have deep discrimination, which is why we're saying the government needs to take very proactive action to sort this problem out. And it's doable, it's very preventable.
And it's not enough to just help women become more aware about their rights, right? Their partners have to be equally aware about what kind of treatment their partners should be receiving.
No, but if you look at the statistics I mean, you're right to say that on infant mortality and maternal mortality, Nepal's done reasonably well. But when all the surveys in Nepal show that at least a quarter of the women in this country have unmet needs for contraception. And every one of these statistics we're talking about, a third of the women only have pregnancy, then you have the birth process with skilled birth attendants. So 60% almost are without skilled birth attendants, and the malnutrition rates are quite high. And every one of these statistics I'm giving you is even higher when it comes to the lower castes, the Janjati, the Muslims, and particularly in the regions which are more backward. So if you say the malnutrition amongst women could be 25%, when you talk about these communities, it's 35%. In fact, there's a pretty close correlation in those communities and regions where gender inequality is high, the uterine prolapse issue is more severe. So you can see that the two issues of discrimination and the incidence of uterine prolapse are very closely linked.
You mentioned earlier how some of these women you talked to yesterday said if they could talk to their partners, they wouldn't be talking to you about their problem. What did they have to say about how the government is responding to their plight?
I mean, that's the thing. So I also spoke to a group of doctors yesterday. They were running a health camp there. So I spent some time also with 3 doctors who are doing their postgrad, and they're spending time in the camp, which I thought was really nice. I mean, some of these things, I should say, we talk about these things in a very sort of depressing way, all these problems, but one also finds a huge amount of inspiration in the women, that they're so resilient. Several of them have been in this condition for 30, 40 years. But they're still saying, no, we're going to get together, we're going to raise our voice with the government has to respond, this is our right. And the doctors there were saying that these women have so little, but they're still trying to do their best. And I thought that the fact that, I mean, those doctors don't need to be there. They're doing that completely on a voluntary basis. So, we have to draw hope from the people who believe that change can happen. And I mean, that's what Amnesty is all about. Ordinary people coming together to create extraordinary change. And Amnesty Nepal is running a campaign on this issue. We're also running a campaign on the whole issue of safe migration. And we're a membership organization. You mentioned it in the introduction. Amnesty is about 3 million plus members who so we don't take money from governments or companies to do our research and campaigning work. It's totally from individuals. It's a people's movement. And so I'm hoping that Nepalis will come together, because this country has suffered so much, poverty and violence, and in this program we're not focusing on that question, but we'd be remiss not to mention the issue of impunity. I mean, the whole issue of transitional justice has ended up becoming transitional injustice. So you have millions of people who are still waiting to see that new Nepal, a Nepal without impunity, a Nepal where the criminal justice system is functioning. You have ongoing disappearances in the Terai region. We get reports of it, torture still widespread, and the people who should be held accountable for human rights violations are being actually given specific senior roles, in the security forces. So, there's a kind of misconception that somehow if you want to have peace and reconciliation, you avoid justice. But international experience is the only route, the only journey to peace and reconciliation is through justice and accountability. So, and these are not unrelated issues. The issues we're talking about, women's rights, is also about justice and accountability. The state has an obligation; they have to deliver.
So you're also going to set up a regional office in South Asia, which will be based in Kathmandu, to look into some of these issues.
Yes, we would very much like to do that because South Asia has a very unique set of challenges. Of course, in the first instance, it's the part of the world with just about the largest population, very high levels of poverty and inequality. And we talked already at length about the structural discrimination against women, against minorities. So we are very hopeful that, Kathmandu, the great thing about Nepal is that it has many challenges, but the people are extremely welcoming, they're very open, they're honest about the problems. So if you look at South Asia, we thought that it's a recognition of the fact that Nepal has been very open, that we locate our regional office here. So I'm hoping to raise this with the Prime Minister when I see him later today.
Thank you, Mr. Shetty, for joining us on our show today.
Thank you.
We were speaking to Secretary General of Amnesty International, Mr. Salil Shetty. Thank you for watching.